Hello and welcome back to the Lose Weight Feel Great Summit. I'm your host, Joanna Peterson, and I created this summit so I can share with you how a healthy lifestyle can transform your life. I'm so excited that we have with us today as a guest, Laura Plumb.
Thank you.
Thank you. Laura is an Ayurvedic practitioner, the author of Ayurveda Cooking for Beginners. She is the host of the 58-part TV series Veda Cleanse. She leads trainings and retreats internationally and offers seasonal cleanses and courses. With all that being said, welcome and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Joanna. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Tell me a little bit more about you, Laura, and how you got into this field, and what is Ayurveda?
Well, Ayurveda is a Sanskrit word that means the science of life. So it comes as it's often called a sister science to yoga. Yoga in reality is really said to be the science of self-realization, the science of realizing your cosmic self, your true self, your infinite and eternal self, the true spirit that has brought you alive and that helps to keep you alive. So first, if yoga is to recognize that that's your essence, Ayurveda is then what does that mean? What is the encoded wisdom for life? And how can we come most fully alive? So they're sister sciences. It's really the same wisdom applied in different ways. So the same wisdom that gives us self-realization also gives us the capacity, as applied by Ayurveda, to have a really radiant, full, sacred, sumptuous life. So Ayurveda is two things. It's first and foremost an extraordinary genius science for healing. So particularly with people who have chronic illness, it's extraordinary for healing. And mostly chronic illnesses are those kinds of illnesses that, well, they're chronic, right? So they're ongoing. And allopathic medicine often doesn't have answers. And so it's really wonderful to come finally to a place where you can find some answers, some solutions, at the very least to reduce symptoms, but hopefully actually to root out the cause and to restore perfect health. The second thing is that Ayurveda is also a great science for day-to-day wellness, for preventative medicine, but more than just preventative. You know, what are we trying to prevent? We're trying to prevent illness. It's more than that. Ayurveda believes that full health is to have a sharp and clear mind, sharp and clear senses, youthful vigor, contentment, and serenity. This is their definition of health. So it's more than just absence of disease. Ayurveda is really excellent in helping us really come fully alive on a daily basis.
And so with Ayurvedic medicine also, you know, there's certain foods that are better for one dosha than the other. Can you get a little bit deeper into that and how to eat for the right body type?
First, let me just say on my website and in my book, there's lots of explanations because what I'm going to say might be sound a little confusing or hard to digest in one go. So there's backup for everyone. But the very simplest way to look at it is the food that is best for you is the food that is organic, local, and seasonal. So food that is organic or at very least non-GMO has the same intelligence that your body is able to recognize and know what to do with. So intelligence in terms of food is food that can be transformed by your body into healthy tissue, organ, and energy. Okay? So on the one hand, it has to have the intelligence. That means it has to be real food, grown as food has always been grown. It's too bad that now we have to have labels for that, organic or non-GMO. Really what that is food. Food has always been presented and grown. The second thing is when it's locally grown, in addition to the fact that you have a lower carbon imprint, when it's locally grown, it's going to be grown for the context of your environment. And what we mean by that is the food that is grown in your environment is grown to balance you and to balance the impact that environment's making on you. So for instance, if you live in the northeast of America versus the southwest of America, you know you've got a very different climate. The food that grows in the northeast is food that is responsive to that climate. It will balance you according to that climate. So as an example, if it's summertime and you're in the northeast, you're going to get foods that are very, very refreshing and cooling. So when you eat locally, and if you're eating locally, you are eating seasonally because a local organic farmer It's going to be growing the foods that naturally come up in that season. And that's the final most important thing to say. The Ayurvedic doshas, which are the mind-body constitutions, technically that's called prakriti. Dosha actually means your tendency for imbalance. But all of us have a mind-body constitution. And those mind-body constitutions correspond to this season. There's a mind-body constitution called Pitta, and that's basically the season of summer. Summer is Pitta season. A person who is very summery, very radiant, full of energy, full of light. Maybe they have a little bit of perspiration, but they can also be competitive, or they like to get out and play. That's a Pitta person. Autumn is the season of Vata, which is more air and or wind, we might say, air and space. So that's somebody who moves, but they're very light. They sometimes might feel scattered. They might feel ungrounded. Autumn is the season when the trees are losing their leaves and we see them flowing on the wind. And autumn leads to depletion. So whereas summer season leads to perspiration and heat, and so a Pitta person has to watch the tendency to get too hot, heat depletes, but heat also leads to inflammation that is very depleting to the system. The autumn season person has a tendency to be overly mobile, and that contributes to dryness, roughness, restlessness, and a nervous system that is overacting, overfiring. They can't settle down, they can't get to sleep at night, and ultimately can create nervous system or brain disorders. And then finally, the other season, the spring season, is what we call kapha. And spring is a season where in the southwest we get a lot of fog. In the northeast they get a lot of rains. But it's a season of water. In Colorado, the mountain snow is melting, the rivers swell. So there's a season of there's a sense of being either heavy or waterlogged. Our digestive system isn't working as well. And we're also ready to start to lighten up for summer. So the kapha person is prone to stagnation, heaviness, excess weight, excess water, and mucus. So those, if you just really think about the seasons, each season, the food that's grown in that season, the food that nature naturally grows herself, she's growing because she's so intelligent. This is so extraordinary if you think about it. Nature is so intelligent that she's deliberately growing you food to balance you according to what she's doing with the weather and the climate. So she's running hot, she's going to give you cooling foods. If she's running ungrounded, she's going to give you foods that need to be cooked, foods that are grounded, sweet potatoes, grains, etc., fermented foods, etc., foods that take us from autumn into winter. And then if she's running heavy, wet, and cold, she's giving us foods that are pungent and light and purifying. You think about the leafy greens that come up in the spring, they often have a pungent taste. They're very light, they're very detoxifying, versus the greens that come up in the summer, which are more gentle tasting and more wet, more hydrating, more refreshing. Just to think about the difference between kale, watercress versus butter lettuce, the kinds of lettuces and things that come in the summer. It's just one example. But rather than get super confused by all the different doshas that we might be, because there's Vata, Pitta, Kapha, as I mentioned, and then there's Vata, Pitta, Pitta, Kapha, Vata, Kapha, there's dual doshas. You could be tridosha, there's 7 different possibilities. And then to confuse people more, whatever your mind-body constitution is, that is your lifetime kind of type, you can go in and out of balance according to stress, according to foods, according to relationships, according to where you're living. So Ayurveda is based on very simple principles, but then applied to 7 billion people becomes very complex. And we say it's a personalized medicine. We meet people where they are. We have individual protocols. We don't have protocols for a disease or protocols for an imbalance. We have protocols for a human being who is unique and individual. And because there are 7 billion individuals, that means there's 7 billion potentially different, unique, solutions to a problem or an imbalance. That means simple principles, complex as they get applied. But to keep it simple for everybody, think about what we call sattva, which is foods that are balancing. The foods that are balancing are organically grown by your local farmer, because that will make them seasonal. And if you just stick to that, you're likely to have radiant health, lightness in body, and great energy. Yeah.
So eating seasonally, I mean, we can do that. That's not a problem. But is there a specific time when to eat and when your metabolism is the best or your digestive juices are best? Is it usually like morning or in the evenings? Is there a specific time that in Ayurvedic medicine is best to have your biggest meal?
Yeah, so effectively we're talking about time. And in many ways, all of the Vedic sciences that give us yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish are all about time. How do you take a spirit and throw it into the time-space continuum and let it be as radiant and strong as it was when you first threw it into the time-space continuum? The time-space continuum will bend, right? Even Einstein said you give light to the time-space continuum and it bends light. So we're going to be bent by time. And the genius of Ayurveda is the understanding of how to live according to time and the laws of time and not get too bent or crooked, made crooked by it. So to eat seasonal is to eat according to time, right? The summertime, the autumn time, etc. And it's easy to say we know how to do that, but the question is, do we really? Most people shop at grocery stores, and most grocery stores have food from every season. And I mean, I know people who will say, well, you know, I'm eating an apple. I eat an apple every day at lunchtime, every day for lunch, or afternoon they have apple for a snack. Apples are seasonal in the autumn, maybe in some places late summer. Apples are not seasonal all year round. So while sure, it's a great snack, that's not a seasonal food all year, every season, right? So what, you know, people might say, well, leafy greens, you've got to get your leafy greens. Do people realize the difference between spring's leafy greens and summer's leafy greens? Because they're very, very distinct. And spring's leafy greens are very heating, and summer is hot. We don't want more heating, right? We especially need to reduce the heat in the summer, because if we go into the autumn overheated with that depletion, basically, because heat depletes, then we're already depleted for the depleting season. So the first thing is for people to really research what's seasonal, or simply shop at your farmer's market if you can afford financially and in terms of your own time. The second thing is to answer your question about time. So if we apply time now to more micro level, what time to eat each day? You know, somebody just asked me this question on Facebook, and the first and simplest answer is, the most important thing is that you're consistent. So look, if you have a job where you're working till midnight, or you're a night worker. I had a very good friend, came out of college, and she was working the night shift as a nurse. And sure, that's not, you know, she's working in the health field, and that's really not a healthy way to live your life, to work at night. But she is, and she's taking care of people. So we have to applaud her for that. And then we want to support her. What time should she have breakfast? If I said 7 a.m., gosh, she's just gone to bed 3 hours earlier. Right? So of course she's not eating breakfast at 7 a.m. Look, we could say eat your breakfast at 7 a.m., eat your lunch at noon, and eat your dinner at 5 to 6. And that's a great template. Basically, what Ayurveda is saying is eat when the sun comes up, breakfast. Noon, or when the sun is the strongest, it's all about the sun. The sun is a symbol or a mirror of your own digestive fire. Think of the fire within your belly as just like the fire around which we and all of our fellow planets are traveling. In the center of your belly, you know, your whole life force basically is circulating from there. That's your central engine. It's cold, low, weak in the morning. So feed foods that are going to be easy to digest. Midday is when the sun is strongest, same with your digestive fire. So that's when you can eat the foods that are harder to digest, or the heavier meals. And that's why lunch is said to be your prime meal, or your biggest meal of the day. Dinner is just like morning. The sun again is low. It's not quite as cool, but it's still fairly cool, and it's still fairly weak. So morning and evening, you know, people used to call dinner supper, and that's from the word soup, S-O-U-P, soup, super. They were having soup for dinner, basically. Ancient people knew the wisdom of Ayurveda, not because they needed to go to the library and get out all the volumes from all the Charkas, Samhitas, and all the different books that we have in Ayurveda, but because that knowledge is within all of us, and that knowledge is in nature. And if we just pay attention to nature, we pay attention to the rhythms of nature, we move according to the time and the flow of nature, we have abundant ease and energy. So it's really about just looking at nature, observe nature, see what's happening, and then live accordingly. We have less fire in the morning, we need more fire. So we cook our breakfast, usually oatmeal, we add spice. The warmth of the temperature of the food, as well as the warming spices,
Mhm.
will help digestion. Lunchtime, that's a fine time to have raw food, or if people eat meat or heavier foods, or even if you're going to celebrate somebody's birthday, that's when you're going to have your dessert. That's when you have your big meal. You've usually got the digestive fire to do it. And in summer, people think, oh, the sun's out, sun's strong in summer. But again, heat depletes. And in the summer, the fire in your belly, the heat in your body is moving to the periphery to be released through your skin. So we have less concentrated fire in the belly. And that's why also in the summer we need to be thinking about, sure, we have more energy thanks to the sun. We don't maybe need to eat as much. Oftentimes we're not as hungry in the summer, even though we may be exercising more. And that's because we're getting more energy directly from the sun. So we don't need as much food, but the food we do eat in summer does need to be highly digestible. I was at the market yesterday. Somebody said, oh, I'm looking for dinner. And I picked up a watermelon that was right in front of me. And I said, how about this? You know, because it was so hot. And for me, all I felt like eating was watermelon. Something very, very cooling. And why not? Mm-hmm. Let's break all the rules and go back to nature's law and eat according to what you feel like eating. Because what you feel like eating, if your tongue has not been trained to eat junk, because that's a different voice, that's the junk voice talking to you, and that's not your own voice. But if you've got a clean palate, then your body will tell you exactly what it needs in order to be and stay in balance in this moment. And what's right for you today might be totally different tomorrow. So we've always got to be able to like keep our knees bent, ride the waves, and stay attuned. Because the world is dynamic, nature is dynamic, you're dynamic. And that dynamism means everything's constantly changing. We're always in flux. Ayurveda is never about finding that one thing that's going to stick. We're never going to be concrete. We're never going to be pylons of steel. We are nature and we're always in flow. So the key to Ayurveda is to pay attention, to observe, and to act skillfully in response to what you're observing.
Beautiful said. What is the best time to stop eating actually? So if you're and you see watermelon is light, so let's say I have watermelon. How long do I want to so-called fast until I have my breakfast in the morning if I'm earlier hungry? Yep. Yeah.
Great question. I love how time is our theme today. So, and it's a great theme for your title for this series, because in a way, one of the greatest ways to optimize your health is to live according to time, meaning to get deep rest at night and to reduce stress. And Ayurveda has always said that we should eat 3 meals a day. And as one of my teachers said, she said, eat 3 meals a day at the same time every day, and in between, zip it. So Ayurveda is not really teaching us to snack, and certainly not to eat grazing throughout the day. Ayurveda suggests that we eat when the sun comes up. Before that, your digestive fire wakes up as the sun wakes up and the day begins. And some people, me for instance, we might need to move the body to really kindle the digestive fire, stoke those inner fires, and encourage circulation. And then, so we don't have to eat until we're actually hungry. But again, try to be consistent with what time that is. So if it's 7 a.m. or it's 10 a.m., whatever time it is, should be the same time every day. Evening time, we're going to eat hopefully before the sun goes down. So in winter, that might be 5:30 p.m., but in summer, that could be 7:30 p.m. But again, just try to be consistent. Then don't eat. So you're at least getting a 12-hour fast. Breakfast is called breakfast on purpose. We're supposed to be fasting for at least 12 hours. Now, in the winter, for instance, I will often eat at 5:30, probably 5:30, and I'll have breakfast around 7:30. So that's a good 14-hour fast. That idea of intermittent fasting, just that very simple thing, is very Ayurvedic. They've been talking about that since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Ayurveda's time. The second thing that Ayurveda recommends is on the 11th waxing day of the moon to fast. Ekadashi, it's called. So Ekadashi, it's just to fast once a month or one moon cycle. And by that, it could be as simple as skipping dinner. So you have breakfast, lunch, you skip dinner, and then you eat breakfast again the next day. Or you could do a 24-hour fast, skip dinner, skip breakfast the next day, so it's lunch to lunch. And then another way to think about it, if you're more of a Pitta or especially a Kapha person, is to just fast, or to fast weekly, but to do it on Monday evenings. So this is very Ayurvedic, this idea that we're talking about weight loss, eat X amount of calories one day and then eat more the next day and then eat less, all that. Ayurveda sort of said it the same thing, but in different ways. One day a week, and Monday is a really good day to do it. Skip dinner.
And why Mondays?
Mondays, did you say why?
Yes.
Well, it's a funny thing, but Ayurveda, again, is actually looking at how do we orient each one of us towards nature. What creates nature in the seasons is actually the cosmos. What creates night and day is the earth spinning on its axis, and what creates each season is the earth traveling around the sun. And all of the planets going along with us create this electromagnetic and gravitational field that we're in. Mondays are called Mondays because it's said to be the day of the moon. And the day of the moon is said to be the day when the moon has its strongest pull upon those of us living beings here on earth. And the moon is said to be a watery, water-related planet. And we call them all planets in this kind of idea here. But water is kind of kapha. Water can create stagnation, excess, you could say. And so on a water day or a kapha day, it's a good day to reduce our intake.
I love it. In a lot of religions, it's Fridays. So when you said Mondays, it's like, that's interesting. Makes sense, though.
It does make sense. It makes sense Friday, too, Ayurvedically speaking, because Friday is Venus Day, and Venus is also a kapha planet. Actually, Moon and Venus are kapha and then secondary vata planets, but there's also the kapha on Friday. But I think for the a lot of the Judeo-Christian cultures, it's because of the Sabbath. So they're saying fast for the Sabbath. Yeah.
Cool. Can you also share with us a little bit about the elements, the 5 elements?
So the 5 elements are space, air, fire, water, earth. A lot of people are familiar with 4 elements. They skip space as an element. Space is an important element to us in Ayurveda because each of the elements represents not just a concept or an idea, but an actual action in the world, a purpose. You could say the world is made up of these 5 elements, and they're made up of these physics, basically, these actions. So space is possibility. Space is a place in which life and biological expressions and actions can take place. Space gives us an opportunity to dream, to imagine, to envision, and even to connect. So space is out there, but space is also within us. We need space in our cells. We need space in our mind. We need space in our colon. We need space in order that these functions, these biological functions, can happen. Air is really wind. Vayu is the word. It means wind. And it's the movement. So it's very, people will sometimes say, well, how are space and air different? Sure, they're all out there. But air is what's moving through space. So air gives us the biological movements in the body. Synaptic firings, right? The mind processing, sensory information coming in, food coming in, impressions coming in, water coming in, all the circulatory system, the nervous system, everything, the digestive system is even moving. So everything that moves throughout the body, right, is governed by that. Vata dosha is air and space, and it's said to be the governing dosha. The third element is fire. And the fire, of course, we're starting to get, I think, a little bit more obvious. The first one is very subtle and very light and maybe a little harder to always be immediately familiar with. But as we go, they become more and more dense and concrete, you might say. Fire, of course, is heat. Fire gives, if space gives potential, possibility, air gives movement and mobility, fire gives transformation. So fire gives the capacity for something to go in the beginning of time, when in the first belly of the first star, right? The first fire, all the elements of the periodic table were basically made because one got heated and transformed into another. And that's how everything, is transformed in our world, both in ourselves individually, both food, but also all of our experiences hopefully get eventually transformed into wisdom. And then we have water, and water gives the element, as an element, it gives the principle of cohesion. Water itself is the binding of 2 molecules, hydrogen and oxygen. In water, single cell molecules bind with others in order to create ultimately life. They create life force, and ultimately that life came up out of the water and started roaming on land. But to sustain it, it always needed water. Water gives the principle of binding, of cohesion. Water people are people who like to bring other people together. They hold together our families. So the fire person is Pitta, right? They're all the things that we think of with fire. They have clarity because they have the light to see clearly. Discernment. They tend to be muscular, competitive, but also brave and great leaders. And with the tendency, of course, to overheat. And then the water people combines with earth, the final element. And earth, of course, is grounding and stabilizing. So it gives a principle of that integrity of that which is stable and steady. When you combine water and earth, you have mud, and with mud, you can dry it out and make a building, right? So water and earth people have strong structure, integrity, but also lubrication. So it's the parts of our body that are basically the mass of our body, the bones of our body, the joints of our body that are well lubricated, the brain, which is basically mostly made up of fat. So Vata dosha is the governing dosha that governs all the movement, and it's air and space. Pitta is fire, teeny bit of water, which governs all the transformation and conversion within us, all the metabolic processes. And then the earth and water give us kapha dosha, and that's all that gives us strength, grounding, and contentment. So there's your 5 elements and 3 doshas.
That was very valuable information. And also just learning, what's right for us, paying attention to our body and, am I hungry? Am I not hungry? Am I eating because I'm bored? Are my digestive juices on? Or do I need to take some herbs? Do I need some ginger or anything to help me? Just like paying attention is also so important.
Right.
Everything you just described.
Right. It's really a beautiful, I always think of Ayurveda as being taking yoga into our daily lives, into our ongoing daily lives. Well, ultimately, yoga is trying to teach us to pay attention. Yoga is about perspective. What do we see? What do we know? What are we able to experience through our 5 senses and through our eyes closed intuition, or our intuitive mind and knowing? But, Ayurveda is yoga is cultivating that through the practices, primarily of meditation and concentration. And all of my spiritual teachers from every tradition have said it's all about where you put your attention. Where attention goes, energy flows. And it's all about expanding the mind so that we can see not just more clearly, but more expansively. And we can be more inclusive in our vision. Mm-hmm. Now, Ayurveda is basically taking that cultivated attention, cultivated mindfulness, and bringing it into every single thing we do. Am I breathing? Do I really need to rush? Mm-hmm. Do I need to stop and take a moment before I open the refrigerator and stick something in my mouth? Do I just need a minute to feel what my body is trying to communicate? Mm-hmm. Do I need to have ginger with my meal because my digestive fires are a little low? Or would ginger be too heating for me right now? Is there something else I might have, like mint, now that it's summer, right? And really, we can give people lists of things, and we certainly do. But I always like to teach people that you have that knowing within. Once you've had the list, use the list as a template. Use it as a guidance initially, just to open your mind to new ideas or to explore. But try to get to a place where you're able to go to the farmer's market or the grocery store or your own pantry, and almost just kind of put your hand over the food and ask, is this what my body wants right now? Mm-hmm. And the more you do that, the more quickly your body will communicate. It's really cultivating a relationship with your body where you're communicating openly and lovingly. And once trust is established, your body's going to communicate with you very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love to hold the fruit always and see how it feels close to me. But yeah, putting the hands over sounds good too.
Yeah, either way, but that sense of being in contact with it, right, and listening. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as we're eating healthy, like you said, eating more organic foods, tapping into our bodies, we establish a better relationship with ourselves and the food, and naturally we can have a more radiant life and have more energy, and natural weight naturally comes off that way because we're more in touch with ourselves, right?
I think so. I think the major thing with weight is stress.
Mm-hmm.
I think stress is the major cause of excess weight, and it depends on what age you are. But the older you get, the more that stress will affect your weight and your energy levels. You know, just Ayurveda's got this genius too, that the doshas accumulate. The doshas meaning vata, pitta, or kapha, the tendencies. And so the older we get, there's more of a chance that they will accumulate. The older we get, the more we need to be balancing, seeking to balance, seeking to purify, so that we can release those doshas. So they aren't, you know, each year getting piled upon, right? The more that those doshas accumulate in the body, the more that we have stress, the more that we have a tendency for all kinds of, just let's call them imbalances, including excess weight. And excess weight is heavy. It's going to weigh us down and slow us down and make us more tired and less energy. And you know, that's even before then the next things that it's likely to create. So just to kind of get back to your question, it's helpful to really think about holding your food or paying attention to your food. But what I wouldn't want to imply is that food is always the answer, because ultimately these Vedic sciences are sciences that remind us that we have everything we need within us. And it's really our mindset. It's really our attitude. It's really our levels. I don't know if you can hear that. I'm echoing.
Yeah.
It's really about being calm and grounded in the body. Then the body will function optimally. And of course, we do need food to eat, but I just don't want to think that we're going to food to solve our problems, especially not our lack of actual real nourishment. Real nourishment comes from being quiet within. Mm-hmm. And then we can actually observe that all of nature is radiantly seeking to nourish and love us all the time. And then we have a balanced relationship with nature. But it starts inside of us first. Even with food, it starts within, nourishing from within, so that then nature can nourish us as she most lovingly intends to.
Love it. Laura, one final question. Is there one thing that people can implement, the audience can implement in their daily life? Something simple, maybe something that you do every day, but something that it can help them to balance themselves and tap more into the energy?
Yeah, I would say get enough sleep. No, but truly be restful, slow down, take deep breaths. It's all about this idea of rest. Not just getting your 8 hours of sleep a night, and be sure that you're in bed by 10:30. 10 o'clock would be ideal. Asleep by 10 is what Ayurveda asks, and then up at 6. And then it's ideal if you can start your day gently, quietly, internalizing the mind, meditating, maybe prayer, mantra, something like this, deep breaths. Maybe it's creative writing, something just create space for yourself. And then throughout the day, ask yourself, how am I breathing? Ask yourself, even if I'm in a rush to get somewhere, how can I do it with a slow motion attitude? Right? How can I go slow-mo through life? Not slow, but let's say gracefully. Because that rushing everywhere is just creating stress. Rushing everywhere is because you don't think you have enough time. But that comes from thinking you don't have enough. And of course you have enough. Every single person was brought alive out of the fullness of spirit, out of the fullness of consciousness, in order to be alive in a world that is abundant, sacred, and sumptuous. And there is enough for everybody. There's enough, as Gandhi would say, for everybody's need, although not enough for everybody's greed. But believing that there's enough, we can move more gracefully through life. So every time we start to get stressed or rushed, I'm enough, there's enough. And then carry on.
I so needed to hear that today.
Okay, good.
Running and I forget to breathe. And then That's the only thing that really puts me back, but I really need to hear that today. Thank you.
Yes, of course, the wisdom is not necessarily new, right? But there are times when we need to keep hearing it, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Laura.
Yeah, you're so
And
welcome. Thanks for doing this, Joanna. It's beautiful.
and for the audience, if you want any information, you can go on lauraplumb.com. Laura sees clients on Zoom, and she has also a lot of courses available. Please check it out. It's so valuable. We all need that. We all need to be more grounded and have a piece of what you have. So thank
I just have a piece of what everybody has, but let's keep sharing it. Yeah,
you.
beautiful.
Thank
Thank you.